Picnic started in 2015 with a very simple observation, that people actually want to shop for food online, but don't want to pay more than in the offline variant. So therefore, we found a way to actually deliver groceries at the lowest price and no delivery fees. We have a very simple design principle. Every product gets only one time touched by a human, which means a product, in order to move it across the warehouse, needs to be touched by somebody or something, usually between 10 to 15 times. So these 14, 15 other touch points need to be done by a robot. Business is technology, technology is business. So there is essentially, you will not hear anybody talking about business or technology in specific terms, because everything is very closely connected to each other. In the same way as we have also organized our teams, that in every team there is certainly the technology aspects represented, but also the business aspects, because both together only can succeed.
This is CIONET TV. My name is Hendrik Deckers. I'm here today with Daniel Gebler, who is the founder and CTO of Picnic. A very warm welcome, Daniel.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Daniel, you have a degree in computer science, a master's degree, and an MBA from the Technical University of Dresden. You started your career as a software developer at Fred Hopper, where you became the director of R&D. Then you did a PhD and you were a researcher at the Vrije Universiteit of Amsterdam, where we are today. And you founded Picnic in 2015, and you hold today the position of CTO. So Daniel, tell us a little bit more about yourself. What's really your background? Who are you really? And how did you arrive in this position?
Awesome question. So my nerd path actually started as a kid, where I was falling in love with computers. And I see really not only the capabilities what computers can do, but also the creativity to build something new, to unlock new business models. And that drove me basically to study computer science, to be part of a B2B business like Fred Hopper, to build a recommendation engine, but now also starting a business like Picnic, where we are revolutionizing the entire food tech ecosystem.
Okay, so you're originally from Germany, and now you live and work in Amsterdam, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so tell us a little bit more about Picnic. I know that you're active in 3 different markets, but maybe some people have never heard about Picnic. Give us the big picture. So
Picnic itself started in 2015 with a very simple observation, that people actually want to shop for food online, but don't want to pay more than in the offline variant. So therefore, we found a way to actually deliver groceries at the lowest price and no delivery fees. But this is only the starting point, because what you then realize is, if you deliver to so many households, to so many customers, then you can do so much at the doorstep of the customer, that we are now looking into what comes next after the kind of food proposition. Okay,
so you are an online-only retailer, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and you started in 2015. Tell us a little bit about your the business side. You were funded, you did a couple of rounds. Can you tell us that part of the story as well?
So we collected a little bit of kind of a money pre-launch, and then I built the very first version of Picnic, which was in Amersfoort, so a city not so far from Amsterdam, where we figured out that if you're approaching customers with a proposition where we say lowest price, free delivery, good service at the door, then actually customers will move from offline to online. And the opportunity was huge, because only 1.5% of all people at this time were shopping online. So we thought what can we do to move from 1.5 to 2 to 3 to 5 to 10? Because that is the real opportunity. And then we basically built a proposition around it, built the technology, first consumer tech, afterwards logistical supply chain tech. And by now we are already operating in 3 countries, have 2 million customers in Netherlands, 1 million in Germany, and already quite a few also in France.
Okay. What's the revenue size, the people size?
So last year we did roughly 1 billion on revenue, and have by now also raised quite a bit of money. So the last round was an investment by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation of 600 million. And that allows us actually to go beyond our manual fulfillment that we have built over the first years. We have built a fully robotized fulfillment center as we speak now. And that allows us to actually serve even more customers in a faster and a more efficient way.
Okay, and what's the outlook? What's the ambition? I mean, you're active in Germany, Holland, a little bit in France. You want to conquer the world. What's the focus for the next 5-10 years?
So there are basically 3 things that are interesting for us. The proposition and the business model that we have built works everywhere where there is not too much snow and where it's not too hot. So everything below the snow line and above the Sahara works very well for us. This is number one, so geographical expansion. Number two is, if you have a very efficient forward logistics supply chain, then you can think about what comes next. So one example for us is we have started also with a return logistics. So if you order, for instance, over a fashion retailer, like Zalando or any other, your fashion, then you typically order 5 pairs of jeans, you keep one and you send 4 back. All of us are doing this. But what is not nice for a customer to find back a kind of a postal service to return. It is not nice for the merchant because it is expensive. And basically everybody is losing in this game. So what we actually developed is a technology that you can send also your fashion back over Picnic to the merchant.
Okay. So you're going to be part of the whole logistic chain to the last mile, to the customer's door, right?
Exactly. So what we do is, while we started with this food forward logistics, we are now moving into an entire logistic platform player that allows to deliver even more services to customers at the door.
In my research, I was quite impressed with the number of awards that you already won. Can you name a few that you've had so far?
So there's obviously quite a few awards, and it's hard to single out some. So we started with kind of the more, let's say, the fastest growing startup, the most impressive tech company, the fastest growing company in the country, etc. But what kept us, what was really an important award for us is also an award which is actually reflecting on our customer service, because we are serving a retail audience where retail actually usually is not such a kind of an exciting and a customer-oriented type of business. Obviously, you sell to customers, so you are focused on the customer revenue, but customer service has been for a long time not focus of retail. And we actually brought customer service in an exceptional way to the doorstep of the customer.
Okay. And what's the percentage in the Netherlands, for instance, of online retailing compared to the total market of retail, and how do you see that evolve in the future?
So if you look to non-food retail, then we are talking easily about 20, 30, 40, 50% already online. So in categories like, for instance, electronics, books, fashion is around 20%, electronics is above 50%. If you look to food, we are still talking about something like 5 to 7% online. So there is a 95% opportunity to still move towards online. And if you look now to other countries, and that is the real interesting comparison, in US you have 20% already in food online. In China you have 30% of food online. So there's certainly a good indication that we in Europe can certainly also catch up.
So the opportunity is massive then. So who are the main competitors for you then? That's the Carrefours, the Ahols and so on, the traditional retailers?
So there's certainly it's a very big space, and there are many operating this space. So there's on the one hand the traditional retailers that have built up also an online proposition. There are online pure players like meal box services. There are quick commerce players. So there's a very diverse kind of playing field by now. But actually the biggest competition that we have seen is the habit of people. And our main audience is our families. And if as a family you have been for 20 years going regularly to a physical supermarket, you will do exactly the same also tomorrow. So breaking this kind of habit, or having a proposition that convinces you to adopt a new habit, to start online shopping instead of offline, that is our real competition that we have.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about retail industry in general today. We live in special times, geopolitical turmoil, war, inflation, maybe a recession around the corner and so on. Really special times. What do you see as the major challenges in retail and today, and how does that reflect on Picnic?
So customers are certainly much more alert on what do they pay, which kind of products they buy, and how often are they buying. So therefore we are seeing certainly that there is a kind of a pressure from bottom, from the top, where customers that have previously bought premium products are now more looking into value products. That is absolutely the case. On the other hand, there is certainly also much more promo pressure, where customers are looking for promos. How can they save a little bit of more money? However, and that is the more interesting trend, is that is combined with a general trend to move from offline to online. And that is absolutely stable, as it has been always. So therefore, we are working along a kind of a stable trend to move from offline to online retail, while there's certainly all kind of external factors that are making e-commerce a little bit harder these days.
Okay. So, I mean, you started only 7 years ago, 2015. So it must have been an incredible ride, going from 0 to $1 billion revenue in 7 years. Where do you see the major challenges or the opportunities, but the challenges for Picnic as a company today?
So let me start with the opportunities, because in essence, every challenge is only an interesting challenge if you can translate this in an opportunity. So the opportunities for us are that while everybody is shopping with us the kind of the basic products, how can we transform this also to shopping with us more the kind of premium products or the meals or maybe non-food kind of items? That is certainly a kind of an interesting opportunity. What is more is, as we are seeing all our customers once, twice, 3 times per week, then you can think of and dream a little bit about what is actually an interesting service that you can deliver at the door that goes beyond our retail proposition. And the third part is, when you're serving 2 million customers in a single country, how can you do this in a very efficient way? So that's the reason why we're building on those kind of fulfillment automation concepts in food that at this moment nobody has built. So this is an entire new way of automating fulfillment that is pretty common already in the non-food world. So Amazon and a few other players have done this in a very impressive way, but nobody has done this in a significant way in food. And that is something where we're really at the forefront.
Okay, super. Let's talk a bit more about technology, because that's your responsibility here in the business today. And you told me that you're working on a complete end-to-end automation of the supply chain. What is that you're going to do there?
So it starts first of all with understanding how are products flowing from a farm to the consumer, so farm to fork type of thinking, where we started with clearly tracking on when is something harvested, does it go through the kind of the different distribution and fulfillment centers up to the doorstep of the customers with our last mile proposition. And then you think about conceptually, number one, is how can you completely integrate this? So basically building in a kind of an entire tech integrated system end to end. But on the other hand is also which elements make sense to automate. So one example is in a fulfillment center, you do obviously a lot of tasks. Everybody is aware that at some point you need to pick a product and put it in the box for the customer. But that is only somewhere between 3 to 5% of the work that is happening in a fulfillment center. So we started to optimize the 95% that is also happening, while the picking itself is still done by the humans. So picking in a banana or picking an avocado is so complex that humans are actually significantly better than you can do than a kind of a robotized automation. So therefore we will for quite a while keep this also let's say a human-empowered process.
Until Elon Musk brings you the robots that can do them in more.
We will develop ourselves.
That's even a better idea. Yes. Okay, so you're building this completely automated supply chain. What does that mean on a technical level? What kind of systems are you implementing for that?
So there is, on the one hand, we are talking about an integration of systems across the entire supply chain. But what is even more exciting is that you are building an also vertical integration of a software stack. So normally in retail, you're talking about cloud services that are predicting demand, that are doing fulfillment planning, fulfillment operations, etc. But if you're talking about an end-to-end automation, you're also integrating in very low-level control. So in drones, in robots, in a kind of conveyor belts, which is a complete different type of tech stack. So you're talking about PLCs, which is technology from the 1780s. There's nothing of this in the cloud. You're talking about latencies that are sub 1 milliseconds, which means that in this case, for instance, we cannot work with a cloud deployment. So we need to have an on-premise deployment. However, our entire stack, rest of the stack is in the cloud. So we are building load balancing between cloud and on-prem logic, where we also dynamically move applications to the cloud or back on-prem. So what others are doing in, let's say, traditional businesses with lift and shift, which takes months, we are doing in seconds in order to move kind of a traffic between the cloud and on-prem.
So Daniel, let's go a little bit deeper into this. So for us mere humans, how do we need to understand that? What's exactly the different processes that you're automating, the systems that you're putting in place for that?
So let me take an example of a fulfillment center. So in the morning, you have around between 1 and 2 million items that come to the warehouse in kind of big packs. So 24, 36, 48 type of packs of Coke or of milk, etc. And then it goes through the warehouse and in a couple of processes up to a storage location of those kind of items. And then at some point it goes from a storage location to a pick location where it gets picked into the order of a customer. All this kind of movements of items, we have a very simple design principle. Every product gets only one time touched by a human, which means a product, in order to move it across the warehouse, needs to be touched by somebody or something, usually between 10 to 15 times. So these 14, 15 other touch points need to be done by a robot, either on a conveyor belt, by a big robot, or in a storage location. And the planning software that we're building there is planning the entire day ahead.
Okay.
But this is such a huge planning problem that is comparable to, for instance, the logistical planning that is happening in a city like New York when Uber is driving around with their taxis. Because you're also you're planning how people can connect to the taxis or taxis to the people. And that is something what we do then in a warehouse where you get connected to a product and to the robot that is bringing the robot to you.
Okay. So I can imagine that there's no off-the-shelf software available to do all of this. So that's all own development, in-house development that you're doing for that?
So we look quite a bit into space, and there are certainly solutions that have started to build us. But when we are deciding on build versus buy, we are actually looking very much into where can our own solution be in 2 or 3 years' time versus where can a market solution be in 2 or 3 years' time. And what we realized is we can certainly build in a reasonable time frame a solution that is comparable to the solution that is now available in the market, but we can be so much faster, outpace the kind of the market solutions that we build, especially this kind of technology in-house.
Okay, so you have a huge software factory here then?
We like to call it not factory, but indeed we have a large software team. So we have now a little bit more than 300 developers that work on things like our robotized fulfillment center, but also on the consumer proposition, on many kind of machine learning tools that we see across our entire consumer and supply chain.
So I'm very fascinated about your amazing growth rate. So in 7 years from 0 to $1 billion revenue, that also means from just you starting it and maybe with a couple of friends, and then you build, if we just look at the IT team, 300 people now. So how do you build an IT team and a digital team from 0 to 300? What are the different steps? What are the milestones in building a team like that?
So there are many milestones that you need to go through, but what is pretty clear is that every 6 to 9 months you need to organize and reorganize yourself in a very fundamental way because you have reached a new growth step. And that means on the one hand you need to have a different organization, so that means different type of products, a different type of organization around the product teams, different leadership also, different type of engineers, different skill levels. But it means also for myself and for the leadership team that we need to reinvent ourselves. So a Daniel in 2015 was a very kind of different Daniel in 2018, because leading a team in 2018 we had around 50 to 70 engineers. Is a very different type of leadership that you need there, versus in 2015 when you just are 5 engineers and try to basically hack something together. And the stages that I went myself through are essentially the stages where I've been a lead engineer, and at some point I have been an architect, at some point more kind of a project manager or program manager, and by now it is more kind of a tech strategist that is looking, on the one hand, still ahead for quite some time, so usually 3 to 5 years as a planning horizon, but on the other hand, also is very practically involved in projects that are happening on a day-by-day basis. I love to also write a little bit of code or be reviewing code, etc. Yeah.
So where do you position yourself today still on the nerd scale? If 0 is, I don't know what code is all about, I only manage the people and finances, and 10 is, I still program myself on a regular basis.
I hope and hope that I can myself still position on a 5. When I ask the team here, then I'm probably more on a 2 or whatever. But it depends a little bit also on in which kind of area and domain I go in. When I'm talking to other CTOs and CIOs in the industry, then I say typically position me more on a 10 compared to maybe the rest of the industry. But by itself, it is certainly a kind of a balancing act between software management, team management, and more kind of tech strategy. While the kind of the day-to-day building, I'm certainly not involved in everything what a team of 300 people is doing.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the software stack that you already mentioned. And I understood that you made some major transformations in that. Tell us what was the problem and how did you solve that?
So we started in 2015 with a very narrow tech stack for 2 reasons. Number one is maintenance is easier if you have only one single programming language, one cloud provider, one underlying platform that you're building on. And it has actually a second big advantage. It makes you extremely scalable on how you can reprioritize in your organization, because you can actually make your engineers move between different product teams, because every team has roughly the same stack. So that's great. At some point we realized that we need to put even more focus also on the data side, not only on the software side. So therefore we built a data warehouse, machine learning, deep learning kind of tools. Also Python became an important part of our software stack. And then when we had a pretty significant set of machine learning and deep learning tools, it became clear that we need to rethink our entire software architecture. And then we transitioned to what we now call a SODA architecture, software and data architecture, where every service that we build, for instance, our consumer app or our customer service solution or any other kind of a product, is actually half software, hard-coded business rules, and half data, which means typically machine learning tools, which are trained models that embody a kind of a business logic based on a trained customer data. And what we are looking there into is how can the performance of a system improve by just having more data in the system. So there is a feedback loop that is always feeding back on a daily basis data in the system that may improves the performance of the system for the next day. Let me make it very concrete as an example. So if we are now delivering today to here in Netherlands a couple of 100,000 customers, then we will simply take this entire set of deliveries that we did today, actuals versus plan, feed it in the system, train the system based on what can we learn from this, at which kind of address, with which kind of weather conditioner, at which kind of daytime did we deliver on time, and at which ones did we not, and what is the delta, and what is the reason of the delta, such that tomorrow, if we do a planning, we can even more accurately plan for those kind of deliveries.
And so you changed to a software and data architecture. What's the implication? What did you really need to change software-wise, and what are the outcomes? What are the results of that?
So the starting point is that we moved from a single software stack, mainly based on Java and AWS, etc., to a kind of a dual stack where the entire data side is based on Python and the respective Python stack, where we need to build all kind of bridges between the Java and the Python stack. So that is the number one. Number two is our entire software design and software modeling and product management is now taking into account not only the requirements of a feature, but something what is even more fundamental. And that is we are projecting for every feature what is the future performance if we have 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times more customers in this specific region, etc. If a system is not becoming significantly more performant with more customers or more deliveries or more data points, then we will not build it. Because this is a kind of a self-optimizing loop or kind of also competitive advantage that you build with more data that is actually even stronger than any software system that you ever can build.
So you are building software systems with the qualification that they need to become more clever the more data you put in there.
They need to be self-optimizing along the time with more data, which means if you look a bit on how you invest from a technology perspective, we want that the performance of software systems are improving without additional software development. Additional operation is basically what generates data, but not with additional software development. This is the holy grail of really reaping a kind of a larger customer set. Otherwise, you're just building, you're performing according to the kind of the initial build of the software system.
So does that mean that you have one big team of software engineers and one big team of data engineers? Or?
That's exactly how we started. So there's a couple of software teams and then a couple of data teams. What becomes clear is if you're structurally thinking so much as a kind of a combined software data teams, then as a first step, we brought all kind of software and data engineers together in this team where basically you have always full stack teams, including data engineers. But now the mentality is also that every software engineer is also data engineer and every data engineer is software engineer. And the next step, what we have done now is when you're designing new systems, we are thinking no longer from a software architectural perspective. Software architecture is the second objective. We are thinking from a data architecture perspective. The first thing what we design for a new data system is always the data model. And software is always built around it, but the data model is at core for every system that we build.
Okay. And so how would you Do you have an idea how you compare with the other retailers, the big brands around in on that data front? I mean, if you compare with the Carrefours or I mean, I've been talking to the CIOs of Carrefour, so that's why. Do you have an idea where you position yourself there?
So most of those kind of players, and it's very hard for me to make a kind of a judgment, but obviously we have a pretty decent perspective. Many of them are still on the level of collecting data, making efficient data warehousing, data lakes out of it, and making a data-driven decision process about what to build next. I have not seen, especially in this kind of more traditional world, that anybody is already thinking about how can data, in kind of an automated way, be a performance accelerator.
And can you tell us what the results are of having this architecture where data comes first and the data architecture comes first? Can you measure the result of that?
You certainly can. So we have deployed this in a couple of cases. So an example is if you're looking now a year back, so we had some challenges around fraud. So especially if you start introducing credit cards, then you will certainly also need to learn how to handle fraud. We had challenges around on-timely deliveries, and certainly also around recommending which kind of products customers will buy. And what we saw along this kind of journey is that, for instance, we halved the amount of fraud that we saw in our systems. We also halved the on-timeliness, so basically twice as often we were on time, etc. So these are massive improvements that are, and what is even more encouraging is that over time we see even the system improve further, just by having additional, more kind of payment transactions in this case, or having more kind of deliveries to customers.
And can you quantify how much money that you saved or that you made extra by having this architecture and systems in place?
At this moment, it is hard to put really in concrete numbers, but this is certainly more on the level of 6, 7, 8 digits. That is a significant amount of numbers.
Okay, so it's millions of euros that you can make extra or bottom line or in cost or whatever. And
just imagine about the revenue that we do on an annual basis, and if you then reduce fraud from something like 1% to 0.5%, then you certainly talk about significant numbers.
Okay. So Daniel, thank you for sharing these insights on where you are in your software development and what your teams are focusing on today. Out of personal interest, what's your vision on a couple of new trends that we see in software development with RPA, low code, no code? What's your vision on that?
First, I love actually that the industry thinks about how to get a larger part of society into building software. I love building software, but had to go through a pretty lengthy kind of education process. If it can enable more people to express their creativity of a system with less effort, that is certainly something what I appreciate. In our own context, what we have learned is that low code and no code is something that works in isolation relatively well, but has the limitation that the transition from a low code, no code solution towards a kind of full scale production system is very, very painful. So therefore, we are thinking always in kind of a productization processes, that somebody is expressing an MVP or a prototype in some language, is then making kind of first scale version in another language, and then is making a full scale version. And that simply didn't work in our context with low code, no code. However, what we have done in this case is that we have built our own no code type of platform based on a reduced version or a limited version of Python, which we call a kind of an edge system environment, where analysts can express in Python or a sub-language of Python their ideas. So that is good enough that everybody who has been going through an econometric studies or kind of mathematical studies can express their ideas, also run this as a prototype. And in the next phase, we are moving this into kind of a software system, and then make out of the software system a SODA system, so software and data, and they're making a real kind of full-scale solution for all our customers. Okay.
So you have about 300 people in your IT, your digital team. How is it organized? How do you set up the different teams? You say that you reorganize every 6-9 months, so what's the current organization?
So if we now go maybe 6 or 9 months back, we had the situation and environment where we had around 200 engineers, and which meant around 20 product teams, and all of them have been reporting. The leadership has been reporting to me, which meant in practice that we had around 45 reports. Made me a very busy man, and was, however, had a very, very big advantage. Because if you have so many direct reports, essentially they don't report to somebody. And I myself focused every week on 3 to 5 teams where I worked a little bit closer with. And the rest was completely autonomously working on kind of the objective or the key results that they were set for the quarter. What we have now is we have still the product teams with a dual leadership team, a product owner and tech lead. Usually also with an OKR, so an objective key result for a quarter. And we have organized those kind of 30, 40 teams in 4 bigger clusters. We call them domains. So there's one which is the entire consumer stack, one is the entire supply chain stack, one is all our data solutions, and the 4th one is what we call foundation, which is kind of platform type of solutions. And those kind of 4 domains are roughly 1/4 from the size of the entire tech team. And that has an own leadership team around product, tech, and engineering.
So now you only have to manage 4 people then?
There's, with the 4 domains, there's now 2 or 3 leads per domain, so there's still around 10 to 12, but it is certainly much more manageable.
And today, where do you spend today most of your time? What are your, if you look at your agenda, what are you most busy with these days?
It's a very good question, and obviously in too many cases on too many kind of incidents or more kind of short-term ad hoc topics. But if I look a little bit to the kind of bigger topics that I'm working on is what is our long-term strategy in the next 3 to 5 years? Also planning how to break down this kind of longer-term strategy into a more actionable goals that we can achieve in a year's time. And also being very closely involved in our strategic developments. So a strategic development is for us, for instance, this entire robotization of fulfillment, where we run 2 or 3 kind of major work streams. So that is certainly a larger part of the team where I'm involved together with the program manager.
And how is the executive team organized? I mean, I can imagine you're a driving force in there, but who are the main players in the executive team?
So our MT, so the management team itself consists of 5 people. So I'm representing the tech side. There's somebody who is representing the entire ops side. So there's somebody who's commercial, and then there's somebody who's representing the entire kind of brand and customer side.
And finance.
And finance is essentially a part of a shared responsibility. We have also dedicated a CFO, but he is certainly also representing the entire finance side.
So 1 billion revenue last year, big company already. Was it 50,000 people that work here on a daily basis? Headquarters 500, IT 300 people. I understand your IT budget is around 5%. Is that correct?
So the entire organization is now 15,000 people, but indeed we have around 500 people here, 300 at headquarters, 300 are in tech. So budget is around this type of size. What we do is we are not setting kind of a fixed budget for technology, but we are looking on every initiative basis on the actual business case. And if there is a sensible business case for a little bit more spend, then we will simply do. It is very much looking into what is the additional market opportunity that we can capture. And then we reason basically backwards from the opportunity to what does it need to happen today.
There's no IT budget, there's only business projects.
Business is technology, technology is business. So there is essentially, we are also, you will not hear anybody talking about business or technology in specific terms, because everything is very closely connected to each other. In the same way as we have also organized our teams, that in every team there is certainly the technology aspects represented, but also the business aspects, because both together only can succeed.
And so how easy is it, how difficult is it for you to build this team here? I mean, we're in the middle of it here, so how easy is it for you to attract top talent, to keep your talent? I mean, we're in Amsterdam, of all places, so how do you attract top talent here to an online retailer in Amsterdam?
So finding the right people is hard for everybody. So that is that's not easy for Google, that's not easy for Picnic. However, if you have a nice proposition, meaning if you work on something that is meaningful for your talent that comes in, and that is challenging enough that everybody can grow, then people will come. So I think that is something we have to some extent figured out. Yep. But it stays hard work, number one. Number two, retention is even a more interesting topic, because if somebody is now for 2, 3, 4 years working on a specific topics, then he or she wants to actually also grow further. Yep. So therefore we started in a very structural way also to build up a people strategy and people analytics to really see how we can help everybody to reach the next level in the organization. And that is something where we have put a lot of focus on now to really build the next generation of Picnic that will drive Picnic even to higher heights.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about your management style. I mean, making sure that your teams are successful. What's your secret of success there?
So first of all, I'm asking every team to define success for themselves. So what means success for them? So I have obviously, on a kind of a broader Picnic perspective, there's some objectives that we set for the entire organization. We break it down to teams, then we can break it down to individual objectives. And then we can basically measure to which extent we achieve this. But what is even more important is the organizational learning that we want to embed in the teams themselves. And the question that I'm asking always at the end of the week or at the end of a project is, if you would run this week or this project again, what would you do different? And the next question, and is even a more insightful one, is explain me why you feel that with this kind of insight, this kind of change, could you have run better? And I'm not so much interested in the learning that you anyway have organically, but I'm interested in the learning that you could have had in the beginning already that would have made this project easier.
Dino, what I wanted to know is how would you describe the culture inside of your company here? Are you still a startup culture? Do you have a scale-up culture, or do you have a retail culture? Do you have an engineering culture? How would you describe it, and what's your influence on this culture?
The culture itself is certainly much more startup and scale-up as in retail. At least what I have seen as retail culture is not something that I would like to see emerge too much here in the organization. While I respect very much retail organizations, but we certainly see ourselves much more as a technology organization, and that is certainly also something what we can brief and see everywhere here. So there's a lot of screens with dashboards, and everybody's very data-driven. Yep. My own role in this has actually transitioned or basically complemented from heading technology to also heading the kind of, at least the culture in the tech team and being a kind of a chief culture in this kind of respect. And what it means is also embracing and reminding everybody that there are specific things that we should certainly put a priority on and a few things that we shouldn't make. So let me maybe give an example. So what happens if you're building kind of very large projects where you have also physical stakeholders involved, like in a robotized fulfillment center, you have all kind of, you build a big warehouse, somebody builds robots, etc. So there's a lot of pressure on timelines. Yep. So we have a culture since the beginning always about engineering excellence. We need to build the best software that has the lowest possible maintenance. So therefore, I'm encouraging everybody and then chasing everybody to make sure that we are still building the least possible maintainable software that needs the least possible maintenance. Yep. Because that is only the thing how we can how we can really grow going forward. Yep. And that is also part of the way how we, for instance, set up our KPIs. So one thing is, for instance, I'm looking carefully into how do we split our time in building new stuff, maintaining existing stuff, yep, and operating our stack. Yep. And what you see in many organizations is that operating the stack and maintaining is easily taking 50, 60, 70% of the time or capacity of an organization, and that is very standard. Yep. And we had a tendency that also started to happen on our case. But I said, well, let's challenge ourselves and let's not take this as granted, because you can find all kind of arguments why it is like this. But let's challenge ourselves and say, maybe should not be like this. Maybe we can do something. Maybe we can move from 50 to 5%. And obviously 5% is a bit too bold as a goal. But in the end, you end up with 15%, which is still a bigger piece, but is certainly much better than 50. Yeah. And that is kind of the way how I also try to drive the culture to really stay very much focused on building as much as possible new stuff instead of focusing on maintaining existing stuff.
So only 15%. That's your goal of maintaining, running the systems, and so 85% of resources would go into new stuff.
This is certainly the goal, and that is also doable for many organizations if you force yourself. And that is usually, that has two things. So for instance, has also a software design and software architecture angle. So an example is if you design a software system, then many software systems are designed, or software project plans are designed to actually build the first version with the least possible effort. Because you have a budget and you want to build, let's say, the initial scope. That's exactly not how we do this. What we do is, we know that a software system version 1 will have a version 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm looking to what is the effort that we need to put in the first version in order to have the least possible kind of next iteration maintenance effort in version 2, 3, 4, 5. So therefore building the sum of all kind of maintenance across the entire supply chain, the entire project timeline, and minimize this with the first type of build. So therefore our first builds will take a bit longer than others, but it pays off in the end.
So what percentage of your systems would you describe as legacy systems then?
You have legacy when you have written the first line of code, which means that certainly there's legacy on our side. If I would reformulate a little bit the question and ask which systems you would consider cutting edge, or where you're really proud of, that you want to see a front page on a tech magazine, versus which ones you're a little bit more happy that it's not, then there's certainly at least half of the systems I'm very proud of in the way how we have built them. But there is something like 25% of maybe our tech stack that needs just a little bit more love, and we are putting a considerable amount of time also in getting this part of the stack to the level where we should have it and where I want to see it.
Okay, so there's a conscious effort to make sure that you don't create your own legacy, or not too much legacy software systems that are too dependent on people that left the company and so on as well.
This is certainly one of the main focus points of our tech strategy. There's one additional one where I'm also identifying on a regular basis, typically on a quarterly basis, what are actually the technical debt areas or the kind of the burning fires that I want to accept, let's say, stay as they are. And that is sometimes a bit painful for an engineer or a technology leader when you see a software system not in the best state. But if you identify a part of your stack being not mission critical, or maybe you don't expect significant changes over the next 6 to 12 months time, then there's no need to actually bring it in a better state.
Okay, let's talk about, we talked about your management style, let's talk about leadership, because I think that's two completely different things. You manage by organizing your teams and setting it up, and the operating model, and also creating a culture and so on. But leading is something different. When we enter the building today and they say, who you want to see, we say, Daniel. So you're clearly a serious leader in this organization as well. How would you describe your own leadership style? And what are you expecting from the teams that you lead? How do you want them to lead their people?
So there are probably two angles that are really important for me. So for most of the things what I'm doing, I want to lead by example. So which has a couple of implications. So which when we are running a project, when we are going for a specific goal, I need to be able and want to be also able to actually perform this in the same way as somebody who is actually picking up the responsibility. The same type of objective. This is number one. But the second one is also, I'm a big fan of leading by empowerment. So therefore, the goal is that I'm empowering as much as possible of the teams to take care of their kind of products and objectives and responsibilities as much as possible. So therefore, my leadership style and my leadership objective is to get as much as possible obstacles and burdens out of their way that they can take the ownership that they need to.
Okay. And if I would go around here and talk to your team, what do you think they will say about you when you're not around? What's the good, the bad, and the ugly that they would say about you?
Well, you certainly should do, and then we will see a bit what the recording says. It's very difficult to make this kind of self-reflection. I think I'm a pretty strong, or what I'm focusing on, giving everybody enough freedom to grow. But on the other hand, I'm certainly also, I'm not sure if you would call it demanding, but I'm certainly also have high expectations. I'm trying to have the expectations as fair as possible. So I have the same high expectations on myself, hopefully even higher. But that is certainly also something what I feel needs to bubble down in the organization. But on the other hand, I certainly struggle sometimes by, it is not directly micromanagement, but I love to go into the details, which means that I just want to know the details, where certainly some teams are maybe a little bit annoyed sometimes, left and right, to which extent I want to go into the details. But I feel you can only in a meaningful way lead if you understand enough about the detailed substance. So therefore, I actually go into a lot of details of many kind of tech projects.
So you're busy with this great venture, I would say, for 7 years already. What is it that keeps driving you? What is the passion, the burning passion inside you? What at the end of the week needs to happen so that you are a happy man?
I think what keeps me rolling, what keeps me awake at night, but also what gives me a lot of energy is that it is pretty clear everything what we do is actually just 10% of the entire picnic story. So there's so much more ahead of us and behind us, that it's just worth working on it. The second thing is working with an excellent team. Really, most people are so strong in what they do, is extremely rewarding. So you see also how everybody has grown along this kind of journey. Yep. And the kind of the style that we apply there is everybody runs a project or takes a responsibility that is at this time a little bit above his current skill set. So therefore, you have something, it's a kind of a stretch goal, but it is, so it's doable, but it's certainly above the current kind of as usual kind of.
We see many people here in the offices. I mean, if we do other interviews, there's many empty offices nowadays. Is all your team here in Amsterdam? Do you want them all to be together, or are they a little bit everywhere in the world as well?
So we have a very simple kind of culture. We have team days where every team comes to the office. So for instance, every sub-team or product team in tech has one day in the week where everybody meets in the office. For the other days, they decide themselves how often they want to come to the office. For most teams, it is usually 3-4 days. We have many that also come for the entire week. What we have done over the last 2 years is a transition from an office as a workplace to an office as a meeting place. We're not there yet completely, and we are not completely done. But what we want is that this is a space where everybody can discuss ideas with them, where they can get inspired, where they can inspire each other, where they can actually acquire new knowledge. And the actual work is happening maybe remote, maybe here, but not per se in the office.
Okay, so is your conviction that to really have well-functioning and productive technology teams, that they need to spend enough time together, and then, like you say, 3-4 days a week is really good, and that it's impossible to really have effective technology teams if they only meet once a week?
There are probably 2 interesting observations that I have from the last 2 years. Number one is, if you want to be truly effective as a remote-only organization, you need to be remote-only born. It is very hard to transform from an organization that has been actually working on-prem as an organization to a remote organization. So for instance, GitLab is an excellent example that has been done really great work as a remote-only team. The second one is, in a remote environment, you can relatively well continue existing projects. We have done this, and those projects run very well. It works for Google, for Apple, etc. What you realize is very difficult, very creative new projects cannot, in an efficient way, start remotely. You need to be together. You need to see eye on eye with a whiteboard, etc. What do you want to build? How do you want to build it, etc. So this is something we have not succeeded. I have spoken with many people in the industry. Many have struggled with it. Would love to hear who has succeeded, but I have not seen anybody so far.
Let's dive a little bit deeper in who you are as leader and as a person as well, because I'm convinced that your personal success and that you have manifested in this organization has to do with who you are as a person, your personality. And you shared with us that your MBTI personality type is you are an ENFJ, also known as a protagonist. And these are people with extroverted, intuitive, feeling and judging personality traits. And these are typically very warm, forthright types that love helping others. And they tend to have strong ideas and values. And they back their perspective with creative energy to achieve their goals. It's a nice description, right?
Sounds great. Sounds great.
And so what I'm going to give you is 5 typical strengths of people with your personality. And so give us some feedback. Which ones do you relate to, and can you give an example? So protagonist ENFJs are typically very receptive. They're very reliable. They're very passionate, altruistic, and charismatic. Where do you put yourself there?
So I'm certainly passionate about the stuff that I do because I simply love it. I'm certainly also I try to give back and have a kind of an altruistic nature for the simple reasons that what I'm doing now is based on basically all kind of people that have helped me along the way, that have built me up in a way that allow me to do what I do now. So therefore, I also love to give back. That's the reason why I do a lot of coaching, mentoring, and also building or helping other startups to get started. And maybe the other kind of key trait that is really important there is also kind of empowering and encouraging a team that to really get the best out of themselves.
Okay. Tell us a little bit more about you do with other software companies and how you mentor and coach them.
So I started with coaching mentoring already 10 years ago as part of a couple of accelerators. So there were startups that are actually pre-funding, that had a nice idea, but that were actually building up a first prototype or an MVP that they wanted to pitch to investors. And I gave them a little bit of feedback from a tech side, from product side, from people side, but also how to actually position this kind of startup in a way that it can get funding. Yep. And what I really like there is working with very young, very ambitious, and very open-minded people that are able to really translate in a very creative way an idea into a first prototype. And then I'm thinking myself, is this something what has enough kind of possibilities, opportunities, and potential going forward? And then I've also invested in many of those that I see then rising along the time.
Invested as well? You're putting money in these companies as well? Okay.
Yes, well, that's certainly something what I very much enjoy, and that is a way also of giving back in the end, to see also how the startup ecosystem can evolve further. We all know that US and China has a very, very strong kind of a startup ecosystem, but we can build the same in Europe if those that have been part of the tech ecosystem for a longer time give also again back with time, but also with a little bit of angel money.
Okay. We talked about your strengths. Now let's flip the coin and let's look at the dark side of people with your personality type. So I'm going to mention 5 development areas, weaknesses, and you tell us where you recognize them and how maybe you have overcome these weaknesses. So people with an ENFJ, they sometimes are unrealistic. They can be overly idealistic. They can be condescending. They can be too intense. And they can also be overly empathetic. So where do you recognize yourself? You can't have these weaknesses to be a top leader. So how do you develop yourself in that?
I certainly I think unrealistic is maybe a too strong word, but what I like is I'm trying to aim for goals that are going definitely beyond what most of the team can currently imagine.
Dream big.
And that is certainly this kind of dream big, act small kind of philosophy that we all in the startup world have. And that has brought us very far, but I'm certainly still push this very hard. I'm trying to stay for this kind of discussions always as much as possible empathetic, because I certainly want to relate to the rest of the team, but I'm trying to really push everybody and encourage everybody to get the best out of themselves. But on the other hand, I want to be also protective to the team, that is nobody overstretching. So we saw during the COVID phase, as an example, that if you don't have any longer the separation between work and kind of non-work, because everybody's working from home, so therefore all waking hours are potentially work hours, that you need to also start to really set up measures so that at some point you need to also block time for non-work. And that is something where I also am pretty passionate about, because we are building a business for the long term, with people that hopefully stay with us as long as any possible. But we can only really benefit altogether from this kind of strategy if you're still healthy in a year, in 2 years, in 5 years' time.
So, other weakness was idealistic or intense. Are you too intense for the people around you?
I certainly got this kind of feedback. Over time, I got less of that feedback. And what I'm thinking now, as you're mentioning it, is did just people around me got acquainted with that kind of trait, or did I also develop further? I guess it's a mix of both. What I'm trying to do, and this is more kind of the true story behind intensity, is I'm trying to bring energy and also a lot of kind of focus on a topic that helps people to truly, let's say, truly see between what is important on a project or on a kind of a work that we are currently doing versus what should we not do at all. Because committing to work is very easy. Committing to not doing something is so much harder that most people are actually struggling more with saying no instead of saying yes.
So Daniel, you're here in a very, very fast growing environment. I mean, you started in 7 years ago from scratch, and now you have a big team, big company, billion revenue. So how do you develop yourself in that environment? How do you make sure that you keep up and that you keep leading the teams?
So there are 3 things that really are important for me here. Number 1 is I'm regularly meeting with peers, and with peers means not so much peers that are exactly the same level where we are now at Picnic, but usually peers that are leading tech organizations that are 1 or 2 steps ahead of me, because that is basically where I want to grow into. That's number 1. Number 2, I love to read, so I'm reading a lot of books and also try to develop myself through that. And the 3rd one is also a very careful self-reflection process, where I'm trying to identify what worked for me, what did I do well, but also what did I not do well. In the same way as we challenge our teams, I do this also for myself.
Okay. You're active in our CIONET community, and so do you learn also from CIOs, from let's say more traditional companies, and what do you learn from them?
I love the CIONET community because it is a community of CIOs that are working actually in a very different environment myself. So when I talk to people from Netflix or from Spotify, then this is a tech environment that I can very closely relate to. When I look more to the environments of CIONET or the companies, then these are actually technology leaders, CIOs, that are working in an environment and tackling challenges that I don't have myself, but actually I should very actively work on preventing to have those kind of challenges. So therefore it gives a very nice and an interesting challenge, or thinking challenge also for myself.
Okay. So Daniel, in your professional life, but maybe also in your personal life, who are the important people that you have learned from, your mentors, people that you look up to?
So there are quite a few people, and it's hard to really single out a single person. I was very close to my grandma, who was actually had a very big family and was in a very empathetic way, helping everybody to build up, encouraging everybody to go through the entire school and academic systems. Where, well, I come from a family of academics, so while she herself was certainly not an academic, so that is also very nice. Where I saw that also as a leader, in this case a mom, you can also encourage your kids to grow into a profession that you yourself cannot immediately relate to. So that is certainly a very important angle. And then from more the kind of engineering leadership side, I have a strong network of engineering leaders up to the point that we have met a few times, Werner Vogels, etc. That is very inspiring and is very helpful to get a kind of a reflection on what do we do now, in which way, versus where do we want to be.
Okay. You have an active coaching program for yourself as well. You have a mentor, a coach that helps you in your own professional and personal development?
So we have some executive coaching set up ourselves. This is more kind of on demand. I'm on a couple of other coaching programs where we, in a less structured but in a more ad hoc way, meet together. So, for instance, with McKinsey, there's a technology training program that we are attending that helps us more on a very specific topic or a very specific challenge that we are tackling. So, an example is said. There's a lot of challenges that in the current economic climate that we need to tackle. So there we got also some very specific coaching.
Okay. Is there a personal mantra that you have, a saying that comes back that really helps you in your work or your life?
What I always tell to myself is nothing is impossible. If you have the right angle, the right approach, the right team, and the right preparation, then you can certainly achieve everything. However, what is absolutely fundamental is that you're well prepared, and the preparation for us, and that goes a little bit back to the culture that we have built here. So our culture, you can summarize with think, dare, do. And think means especially focusing on the point of upfront careful analysis and preparation and thinking through the kind of different scenarios before you do something. And this dare, do means basically go for the moonshots instead of just incremental improvements, and do basically focuses there on executional power, execution excellence, because there's any kind of idea without execution, it has no value.
Okay. You mentioned values. Let's talk a little bit about your core values. You shared with us that you have 2 kids, 11 and 14. What are the core values that you yourself live by and that you're passing on to your kids?
I think what is there, so as a parent, you certainly act in a slightly different ways than in a business context. But what I find very important is integrity and staying true to yourself. And that is especially, because we are talking about parenthood, is in today's time not so easy with the entire peer pressure that you have in social networks, etc., where staying true to yourself, building up confidence and also an own personality that is not just shaped by either the kind of the most impressive or the least conflicting average of the people that you're close to, is a real value that I hope that I can give to my kids.
Okay. In your professional life, obviously you've been very, very successful so far. So, but we all make our mistakes, right? So we all make our mistakes. We all have our failures. So could you pick maybe what was your most brilliant failure from the last 10, 15 years and what you learned from it?
Where to start? So maybe let me pick 1 or 2 that are kind of more exposed reflections. So when we were going live in August 2015, we are thinking a little bit about what is the kind of the initial go live scope. And we're thinking about, okay, we need to have an app when we go live, there should be nice products, and we should be able to deliver this to product. But we had a debate, should we have a functionality to add a product to an existing order? And that would have taken us to build this at this time only 1 or 2 weeks. So we said, well, let's do this at a later moment. Go live is more important at this moment. 3 years later, the entire industry basically moved into a mode where this became standard. We needed to implement this, but that was a kind of a legacy that we had to build up because not doing it in the beginning, which took, instead of the 2 weeks in 2015, took us actually nearly a year to build because it was a major refactoring of the entire data model and lots of backend systems. So that is, it's just a fuck up. So that is certainly, but the interesting thing, and that is what I'm asking myself, and I think what is important for every CIO, if I would go back now in time, what should I have seen? What should I have known at this point in time to not make this kind of decision, which is obviously exposed 3 years later, was a wrong decision. But it's not so clear and obvious what additional question I should have asked. And maybe one additional one or a second one is there is a lot of we have in the beginning put a lot of focus on building all kind of initial software systems, but data was in the beginning too much an afterthought. We had only built a kind of analytics and reporting systems, but this kind of feedback loop, which the kind of soda architecture that we talked earlier about, if we would have started with this much earlier, we could certainly have even faster growth than we have done in reality now.
Okay. Last question on technology, because we love to discuss or talk about technology, of course. If you look at what's out there today and the newest stuff that you're working with, what is for you the most exciting new technology around these days?
So there's a lot of stuff obviously going on, and we all have seen AI and machine learning, deep learning, IoT, blockchain, and many, and AR, VR, etc. And I have tried and prototyped with all of those kind of technologies, and that is a little bit of kind of my this is my weekend hobby. What I'm getting very excited about is more the foundational or deep technologies that are unlocking the kind of the next generation technology. For instance, as an example, I'm not so excited by crypto or by NFTs, but the underlying blockchain technology is something what I find very exciting. And what I feel there is that what we have seen with NFTs and crypto, for instance, is most likely not even the kind of the innovation that will stay for very long, or that will be the kind of the main driver for what blockchain can do. Okay. But there is other stuff that will probably make this kind of foundational deep technology a real winner on the long term.
Okay, and where do you see blockchain opportunities in retail?
So the most obvious one, and that has been pitched already since years, is the tracking of products from the producer or from farm to fork. So that is already since 2015 or so pitched. We have tried it, but interesting learnings here is blockchain tracking of products can only work if every party involved, and there's quite a few in a supply chain, is actually working with a blockchain. And you have a lot of players there that are technology-wise certainly not on the level that they can use a blockchain. So that means you have essentially a blockchain with gaps, and it will not work if you have gaps in your blockchain. So that is just not working. Maybe another technology, not so much to the picnic case, but one thing what is, I think, very nice to think a bit about is the merge of actual reality and virtual reality in this kind of what is called AR, so augmented reality, where we have seen obviously all the Google Glasses in a few cases, but that is a little bit creepy and maybe not yet the case that is to come. But there is most likely there are scenarios, or you can imagine scenarios where we will probably live only in augmented reality, and a pure reality will happen maybe in your 2 weeks vacation where you go to digital detox, but the rest of your day-to-day business will be purely augmented and no longer actual reality.
Pretty scary, no?
It is scary, but to some extent, if you go back, people also found scary, for instance,
the train and the
cars
television
and trains, etc. And there have been rules to the trains should not go faster than 30 kilometers per hour because people thought that you cannot
the cows
stay sane. Exactly. Yes.
So how about this? I'm pretty fascinated at the moment about this AI prompted art creation, like Midjourney and DALL-E and so on. You're following up on that as well?
I'm absolutely love this kind of trend. I like to see this. So and there is so we are here in Amsterdam. So let me take a Dutch example. So there is all kind of examples where what would be an additional picture of Van Gogh or von Rembrandt look like. So what is interesting, and that opens up actually a much more fundamental question, because this is essentially extrapolating a painter process or a creative process, and it's pure extrapolation. This is not creativity, at least not creativity in the way as philosophers would define this. But the question you can also ask the other way around: what is true creativity in a world where actually extrapolating past creativity is something that you would consider pretty much also creativity? So when you hear this kind of song of, let's say, this additional song of the Beatles that was created, some people like it, some not. But you certainly see that there are elements in it that make it clearly a Beatles song.
Daniel, you said you spent your weekends figuring out, trying out the latest trends and new stuff. But outside of technology, what do you spend your time on, your free time on in the weekends?
So when I'm not spending time with family or with technology or all the other things, then I love to be on the water and do a bit of kite surfing and enjoy a little bit with the wind, the waves.
Okay. On your personal life, if I may, if you look back on your personal life, what would you consider is the best thing that has ever happened to you?
I think life itself is something that is great that it happened.
What are the chances, right?
Exactly. There are many things that actually accumulate to what I do now and what I was able to achieve. But I think a nice, kind of a very important event was when we finished Fretterber, so this B2B business, sold it to a technology holding company, and then actually could rethink again what comes next, which is a very nice moment. Where I did not immediately jump into kind of the next opportunity in tech, but said, well, maybe it's time to do a PhD and let's actually do some academic work in order to reset your thinking and to rethink what comes next. That was certainly a very important moment.
And what was your PhD about?
So my PhD was about, in theoretical computer science, about software verification. So software verification is you have a property of a system, which for instance, it doesn't crash or it has this kind of latency, and you try to prove this property for an actual program. And that is a problem that has been solved for what is called sequential programs, so on a single core, on a single processor. And I developed a methodology that you can do those kind of proofs also for largely distributed systems, so basically multi-cores, multi-cloud, etc., but also systems where the connection between the nodes is not reliable. Like in, for instance, normal cloud environment, you cannot rely on that you have a stable network connection between the nodes.
Pretty deep stuff.
It is certainly something not super practical, but we had a lot of fun there. That's true.
Well, we talked about the best things that happened in your life. Let's look at the other side as well. If you care to share, what was maybe the worst thing that has ever happened to you in your personal life, and what did you learn from it? How did you overcome that?
So I think what was a very influential and deep moment was when my dad died in 2002, because he was leading a larger business, was very influential in the business, but also at home for the family. And I was at this time only 20, and was certainly not yet mature enough to properly cope with this situation. But it gave me also a little bit of kind of a perspective that you should spend in a very meaningful way time with family, friends, but also on the business side. You should, the kind of the business opportunities that we go after are ones that we also really deeply care of and that are not only ROI-wise make sense.
Yeah. If you reflect on yourself, what would you say is your own personal most important gift that you received from life and that you now can express in what you do?
The biggest gift is probably that I can stay, depending on whatever kind of circumstances, very positively minded. So I can see end of the light of the tunnel in most, de facto all circumstances. And that is something what is probably a key trait for every leader, because people are looking up to you. If you're not positive, your team cannot be positive. So that is absolutely necessary, but it helps also to actually think beyond the kind of beyond today's kind of challenges and think a bit about, if you solve this challenge, what is the next challenge that you should tackle, and already prepare yourself that you're in the best possible position to tackle the tomorrow's or next week's or next month's kind of challenge.
Super. Daniel, thank you so much for your hospitality and welcoming us here in your headquarters in Amsterdam. And I wanted to end this interview with the traditional question: what is the advice that you would give to young professionals that want to follow in your footsteps and that also want to become a CTO of a large organization or a big scale-up, a billion-dollar company? So what is the advice that you would give to them? So
first of all, before I give answer to your question, it should not be the goal to become a CIO or CTO, but the true goal should be that you work on something meaningful that you can be at the end of the day proud of. And then for a technology leader, the most important trait that you should build up along the journey is that you are build a conviction about a direction that you're going and that you can convince your team that this is the right way to go along with. This is number one. Number two, maybe a kind of a bonus one. Technology is only a tool. The true thing, let's say the true disruption, is always in product. It's a kind of a dual of tech, but think a bit about how can tech enable new business and how can business be basically powered by new technologies. If you find this kind of dual between business and tech, you always will have a winning formula.
Okay. And on that note, thank you so much, Daniel. It was a pleasure. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.